There are honestly few things I find funnier than one grifter trying to sell their grift to another grifter. It's kind of like an Ouroboros, but the snake is an ignorant narcissist. So when I found this clip of Cliffe Knechtle giving 4 reasons to believe in Christianity to, of all people, Logan Paul over on his Impulsive podcast, I just knew it was going to make for a good time.
Why Christianity? There's so many denominations out there, and to be able to put your foot down on one, especially when they all have such positive teachings, for the most part, it's just so hard for me. So why Christianity is the question.
So we're kicking off the clip with a fairly straightforward question from Logan. It's honestly not the first question he should be asking, but it is a valid question nonetheless. Out of all the variations of Christianity, 6 major families of Christianity, over 40,000 denominations of Protestantism, by what mechanism can someone determine which version is the correct one? Now, to quickly address that question, in the light of the claimant's inability to actually demonstrate that their God is a thing that exists independently of mind and context without begging the question, the answer to this is largely going to depend on various hermeneutical and exegetical appeals. And seeing as how there is currently no solution to the hermeneutical and exegetical problems, then we can conclude that the family or denomination of Christianity that one happens to fall on is predominantly going to be influenced by the one that aligns with their fifis. Now, knowing that, let's see how Cliffe responds.
All right. The historical evidence is Jesus lived a sinless life. He never sinned once. In John chapter 8, he could look into the faces of his enemies and say, which one of you can prove me guilty of sin? And his enemies were silent.
And Cliffe completely drops the ball here. The existence of the character of Jesus and the story that he led a sinless life are of course theological claims contained in one book. They're technically no different than any other holy character in any other holy book living what that culture has subjectively determined to be a sinless life. This claim within Christianity is however not evidence for the truth of Christianity. At best, it's just evidence that the religion of Christianity, like all other global religions, has its own established mythology. Cliffe repeating the story as though it were an established historical fact is just him begging the question of the truth of his particular text.
Secondly, he taught amazing ethical teachings that I think all of us respect highly. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7.
Again, same issue as the first one. Just because these claims exist in a book that Cliffe himself happens to put a lot of stock into does not mean that they actually happened in reality. And even if these particular claims did, that would not logically entail that the individual who inspired the character was himself supernatural in nature. This is the difference between historical and theological claims. Historical claims are determined probabilistically based upon the preponderance of the evidence. Theological claims are merely accepted as being true as a matter of faith. What Cliffe is technically arguing for here is the acceptance of the theological claims as being evidence of the truth of Christianity, while ignoring that for those theological claims to actually be true, his God would first necessarily have to exist, which is a positive claim that both Cliffe and Logan here are simply accepting as being true right out of the gate.
Thirdly, you watch him die. At the moment of his most excruciating pain and agony, nailed to a wooden crossbeam, he prays, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
While the crucifixion is largely considered a historical event by biblical scholarship, and I get why, because crucifying troublemakers to send a message to the rest of the populace was pretty much the standard in ancient Rome, Cliffe here is making the exact same mistake again. That a guy in the ancient past broke the law and got himself summarily nailed to a piece of wood for what he believed in is not itself evidence that what he believed in was actually true. Legions of humans throughout history have gone willingly to their deaths for things that they believed were true that were later revealed to be false. That the individual themselves believed it and was willing to die for it is also not evidence for the truth of Christianity. It's literally just evidence that one guy believed a thing.
But fourthly and most importantly, 3 days after he dies, he physically bodily rises from the dead, and over a period of 40 days he appears to over 500 people who see him different times, different places, risen from the dead, Paul records in 1 Corinthians 15.
Ignoring that there is an argument that could be made that because of all the theological interpretations and contextual additions made by Paul, this really makes modern-day Christians not followers of Christ, but followers of Paul. So technically they'd be Paulians, or Paulites, or Paulitards, whatever. Cliffe wraps this whole thing up with a repetition of the theological claim of the resurrection and the claim made by Paul that afterwards Jesus appeared to 500 people. People whose names that Paul did not record, people in places that Paul did not record, people whose own personal accounts Paul did not record, people that Paul in all likelihood never spoke to himself. Meaning that Cliffe here is not actually citing 500 people's claims about one person, he's citing one person's claim about 500 people. Again, just like the prior three reasons he gave, his reasoning here is entirely circular. Ultimately, he's just begging the question of the existence of his God to do the things that he thinks it did, and he's relying on faith alone to justify the obvious break in his personal epistemology. Let us know, Cliffe, when you can actually defend your position without throwing reason and logic out the window. And to Logan, if you really wanted a justified reason to believe in Christianity, the question you should have opened with is, can Cliffe demonstrate that the God he thinks exists actually exists without begging the question? Because for Cliffe's version of Christianity to be true, his God would first necessarily have to exist, right? And until one of these theists is able to do that, there's no rational justification to believe that any of this stuff is actually true. In other words, Logan, when it comes to addressing Christianity, just employ the exact same reasoning you do for why you don't accept the various God claims from other cultures from all around the world. Be safe, be excellent to each other. I'll see you next time.